Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share our story as well. We are the first, breakout for this stream around engagement, and we really wanted to start with a little bit of a light touch to talk about, our experience with undertaking, these sorts of analytics or projects, and really to talk about the project in and of itself, what we would experience. So it's targeted at quite a broad audience. And I know that following today, I think this afternoon, Tomeka actually has another session on research methods at work, where we take a deep dive into the more technical aspects. And I think Patrick and Luke are going to be following us straight afterwards with a bit of a deep dive as well. So hopefully this will ease us into that engagement. As Sonia said, we're part of EY. We're actually the internal analytics team. We also do reporting, data management, workforce planning as well. We're about 100 odd now. We're into our journey for the last 5 or 6 years or so. And Tomeka joined our team about 3 years ago, our chief data scientist, 18 months, there you go, and has come all the way from Chicago to be with us today, but also to do some, obviously, work with our local team as well. Tomeka's going to take most of the session today. One of the key messages or themes we have is all about these sorts of engagements driving business value. So what you're seeing here is really a microcosm of the skills that make up our team. My role is the translator. I need to take the business strategy, convert that into a talent strategy, and then turn it into something that we can actually collectively deliver against. Obviously, Tomeka and team are the ones who will do the interesting work and the real work, but then we have to translate that back as well, and really that's what the topic of today is all about. There we go. Usual disclaimer, you'll see a few of these, I'm sure, as you go through, but whatever we talk about today is illustrative in terms of any numbers you see. Please don't take back and use, if you will, to make decisions locally. From an agenda point of view, just very, very quickly, we'll just talk very briefly about the connection with business outcomes, not just our employee outcomes. The bulk of the session, Tomeka will take us through critical thinking and really the process of getting to insight, and we'll leave you with some final thoughts as well. It's always hard following Al Adamsen and his very charismatic way of sharing really where analytics is come and is going. I certainly enjoyed this morning. A lot of it resonated certainly with us. We saw ourselves in what he was saying. But, fundamentally, why do we do engagement analytics? 5 years ago when we started our journey, a lot of pushback from our HR colleagues was, yes, it's not about the money, it's about our people, it's about them feeling good and feeling engaged. Frankly, that's not enough, and it's important, but there's more to it than that, and that's really a theme right throughout certainly this presentation, but a theme right throughout every single analytics project that we do within our team. We have about 14, I think, in our team. We do want to identify the best employees. We don't want to identify the model employee. That doesn't exactly help diversity. But we do want to understand what the different types of good looks like. We do want to look at the moments that matter. When you're hired, your first experience, your first day in the office, your reward, not the process of reward, but when you get that letter that says this is your bonus this year, when you leave, how you're treated. Those are the moments that matter. From our perspective, we want to make them matter. So that's the whole point of doing a lot of the analytics we do. But most importantly, and certainly our approach, I say most importantly, we need to be able to convert all of that into something that has meaning for our partners. So in our world, we have partners, it's the same as a shareholder. If it doesn't put a euro, a pound, a dollar into their back pocket, you've got to question why you're doing it. It's not just about the engagement, it's about that plus the return as well. We won't dwell on this. Everyone's seen the model. This is not a maturity matrix. I think everyone's on that page now. This is really just, again, to put in your mindsets as a handover to Tomeka to take us through. When we think about engagement, every single thing on that page is important. You do descriptive and you do diagnostic and you do predictive, and if you're really good, you can get into the prescriptive as well. We're certainly working towards that end of the journey. But as we'll see in a moment, every single one of these is important. I just wanted to plant that in your minds as we hand over to Tomeka. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, again, my name is Tomeka Hill-Thomas. If he's the translator, I'm essentially the computer. I do all the calculations for them in a way, and hopefully give them something that is understandable, not just to him, but for our stakeholders. So what we're going to do today is talk through how you scope, plan, and essentially implement a talent impact assessment. So we're going to start off. Have you guys ever been sitting at your desk and all of a sudden, beep, you get this email and a question like, for instance, we would like to know if the new pilot training program we put in place last year in our French plants led to added value. Okay, that's definitely a loaded question. That's definitely not a yes or no question as well. So we have to think about how we're going to answer that question and similar questions that we have listed below. So when preparing for a response, one of the things you have to recognize when answering these questions is that you need to define the goal. So looking at the previous slide, those three scenarios, the C-suite essentially wants to know if new training, retention, and total compensation are positively impacting business outcomes. In other words, how is this impacting total net revenue, gross margin, and production efficiencies? So it's just so important. Not only are you giving an answer to the questions that talk about, yes, people are staying longer, and yes, this is helping improving efficiencies, but it's also important to how does that fall into the business? How does this impact the business? At the end of the day, it is about business growth with the companies. Okay, so first thing first, you're going to start scoping the project. I have my analogy picture here. You're getting ready to set up for a race here. You're getting your feet together. There are 5 steps that I've come up with to help you lay the foundation, which is defining the research question, defining the test population, getting the data, and make certain of data privacy, as well as actually designing an action plan. Okay, so defining the research question. What exactly are you testing? You need to make sure you clearly have that defined when you're moving forward. And you also need to make a decision when you are approached with a question whether or not it's actually worth doing. Again, you need to make sure that you're doing something that actually will impact or help the business. You're not doing something because someone's interested in just some fun fact. The last thing you want to do is spend 6 months on answering a question that's only going to be a bullet on a slide and nothing else comes out of it. You also need to make sure you have the right people on your team. You need to make sure that you have time to do this project. And most importantly, you got to make sure you have the data. Data is imperative. You can't do anything without data. And again, like I said, you always have to make sure the business question is being addressed. So determining the test population. Typically there are 2 scenarios. There's one where you look at the impact or a change to a specific population. The other is when you're interested in the behavior or certain characteristics of a specified population. So in scenario 1, I think I can best describe that as an example. Here at EY, we changed our performance review process, and we wanted to know, was this for the better? So we did a test where, initially we had a test group, and then we had a control group. We looked at what was happening before. We did an impact, we did the test, and then we looked at what happened afterwards, and then we made a comparison between the test and the control group to see if there was any difference. With the second scenario, say for instance you want to look at the retention of a specific group. Well, you need to have certain variables such as demographic information, age, the tenure, the time and rank. You want to know probably their salary, where they're working, how many hours are they working, are they putting in overtime? There are variables like that that are very important when you're looking at to determine whether or not there's any type of specific behavior within that group. Okay, getting data. What are your data needs? You need to determine what you need in order to answer the question. And you need to know where it exists. I guarantee you the core HR, the revenue, the learning information, the engagement surveys are all existing in different places. So you have to figure out, one, who is managing that information, and two, how can you get it all together into one system so that you can use it for your analysis. This will be a good time to bring in an IT person who, will probably be doing this work for you. And I think it would also be useful to have an executive or a VP, someone there, the big boss, so that you can pull out the big guns to help convince the IT person how important it is. This is going to require a lot of work to get this data together, so you really need to have as much support as you can when you're putting the data together. Okay, making certain of data privacy. This is so important. You need to safeguard employee identities. You probably need to limit who has access to the information. And there are several steps that you can go about in doing this. For instance, in protecting identity, instead of using the typical employee ID that you have, it might be useful to have a masked ID that you can use. That way, no one will be able to go to the data and be able to identify someone's age, their address, their salary, for instance. Another example of helping protect people's privacy is to add noise. So, for instance, for a specified group of people, you may know what the average salary is. You may know what that spread of the salary is. You can take the data, take people's salary, add a few thousand here, take away a few thousand there, where the overall average doesn't change, their overall spread does not change, but you no longer have people's personal salary on the file anymore. And that is just very useful because remember, data like this is very useful that you use it for aggregate analysis, regression analysis. Never use it for any reporting or anything like that. Another thing I think is very important is how you store this information. Make sure you limit the information that is on there. And you also want to make a decision on how often this information is going to be updated. I think it's going to be a decision that you and IT will have to make together because it depends on how difficult it is. Not every part of the data is going to be updated at the same time. For instance, core HR, your birthday is not going to change. Your start date is not going to change. But your training may change annually. Your salary is definitely going to change annually. Well, for most people anyway. Someone has a question?
Just saying, fingers crossed it changes every year on the upwards way, but Brexit's not happened yet, so.
Okay, and then designing an action plan. So you need to be very specific about team members' roles and timelines. You need to be clear about what each person is doing. You need to document everything, and you need to assign the steps. Not only is it important within your team to understand what's going on, it's also very important that your stakeholder understand what's going on, at least in layman terms. They don't need to know the very specific on how you're going to do a certain high-level regression step, but they need to know that you're going to be doing analytics at this point. So everybody is in the loop. Okay, so now the second part, establishing a point of view. Okay, so now we're up and running. The gun has sounded and you're taking off. So the first thing you need to do is determine a single owner, understand that fact-based findings drive rationale, and at this point you want to visualize what you're going to be delivering at this point. So determining a single owner. The single owner is going to be the person who's the driver of the project. They're going to be the one setting the timelines. They're going to be the one making sure you get what you need. If someone has an issue because they can't get a certain data list that is imperative, that single owner is going to be the one you go to, and he's going to be the one who's going to make that phone call to get what you need. Also, this person more than likely will be the one communicating with the stakeholder. They're going to be able to explain this project in non-technical terms to the stakeholder, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be, lack of a better word, managing the stakeholder and make sure they understand what the expectations are.
I have a quick question on that. What kind of profile do you usually put in that position? Because it's kind of an interesting, diverse, with somebody that has to be very detail-oriented, know the data, but then also when it comes to the stakeholders, needs to communicate often in a different kind of way, maybe with somebody who's not as familiar with that kind of data.
So I would choose someone who have a basic understanding of the process that the analysts are doing, but who is excellent in talking to someone in layman terms with the stakeholder. The stakeholder doesn't need to know how the analysts are performing every single bitty technical detail of the process. They just need to know, okay, I know this is happening. I know roughly what the results are going to look like at the end. So I know what I need to tell the stakeholder when the time comes.
Yeah, and Sonia, just to add to that, there's, part of a challenge we will all have, although those of us in these teams, is they're small. And you can't have, there's very few unicorns, who have every sort of attribute. And if you've got a team of 4 or 5, but there's 10 different profiles you need, you have to pick and choose. So it is hard, but I think, different projects have different levels of importance, priority, sensitivity, etc. So if it's, a recent one we did, if it's a diversity, actually a bias study on performance rating, which we won't share the results on clearly because we're wonderful, but that's very sensitive. There are legal implications. I would get involved with that as a leader, and maybe not be the owner, but certainly the one to be the owner externally. But then there's other projects where it might be more localized, and engagement's good for that, because engagement by definition, in my view, is localized, right? Culture is localized in a lot of ways. That's a development opportunity as well for someone. You don't have to have the right person. Actually develop your team by putting them in position in the smaller projects. So.
No, and to me, that's something that's so critical, because I've definitely seen big projects, and then you look at your stakeholder and their eyes just start to glaze over at some point as you're going through the results, and you're like, no, we need to recover that. So sometimes the reason I ask that is I try, but I'm also a very good person to empower a team and to get people trained up to be able to have those kinds of conversations. So sometimes it is that balance between trying to put somebody in that position and being there, like your positions, just to monitor what's going on in the stakeholders' expression if you need to jump in or pull something back. But I wanted to ask about this because I think there's so much that happens in the project, and then sometimes you have that delivery point. It's such a critical 30 minutes or an hour and a half, and so I've seen it managed very differently. So thank you. I think those are good tips.
Okay, fact-based findings drive rationale. Do not force the story. You may get a lot of pressure from a stakeholder that they want a story out there and they want you to tell that story somehow, some way with data. Even if that means you might have to fudge the data. You can get in a lot of trouble with that, particularly if you get caught. I was telling Blair just yesterday a perfect example of this. There were Harvard professors who wrote this paper about austerity is the way to go during the economic crisis 10 years ago. These are very well-known, very established Harvard professors. So they wrote this paper, and as a result of this paper, as you know, was it Greece, Italy, I think UK, they actually implemented austerity provisions. A grad student was given an assignment a couple years later to replicate their data, replicate their work. Found out that these professors were deliberately selecting certain countries and deliberately taking out and not including other countries. And they got busted. If they had included everyone like they should have and like they said, austerity would not have worked. And I was just thinking to myself, these established professors, Harvard, University, now they're walking around totally embarrassed because now everything that they've worked on before is questioned, and everything they're going to work on in the future will always be questioned. So if you ever are in a situation where a stakeholder is trying to force you to tell a story and trying to pressure you to find the data to tell that story, push back. It's going to hurt your reputation more than anybody else's. And just very quickly, make sure that you explain your methodology clearly, again, with the stakeholder. Make sure that the stakeholder understands in layman terms that what you're going to do. And just like before, bias could discredit your research, so try to be as unbiased as possible. Okay, visualizing success. And how does it look? Well, this is very important because at this point, you need to decide what you're going to deliver to the stakeholder and how are they going to use it. In what form do they want the results? Do they want it in a PowerPoint slide? Do they want an interactive visual? These are things that within conversations with the stakeholder, you'll have a better understanding of what they want. And then just one quick note, right now is the time before you start whether or not this is going to be a continuation of a project. You want it automated so it can be updated annual, or if it's a one-time thing. Because if it's going to be automated, if this is something that they're going to want on an annual basis, for instance, this is a conversation you're going to have to bring IT in because they're going to have to update this information. You don't want to ever wait until after the project is over and then tell IT, oh, you remember that project you did like last year for us with the data? Well, I need you to do it again. And they're going to get mad because they know how to already implement automation techniques within the data. Okay, so now plan to implement. All right, we're off and running. I'm going around the bend. And at this point, you need to clarify and answer any new questions, determine your computation needs, and you need to finalize your implementation plan. Okay, so clarify and answer any new questions. As you are putting your data set together, you're going to realize that data that you thought you had access to may not work out. It's too difficult to integrate into your current system, or the data may be bad data because no one really cared about it before. When that happens, you're going to have to change your plan, alter your methodologies. You also need to make sure you communicate this with the stakeholders as you're doing this. Determine your computation needs. At this point, you need to determine what tests you're specifically going to do. This is where your analyst comes in. They're going to talk to you about what they're going to test. They're going to talk to you about the results. And once you have a kind of a general understanding of what the results look like, that's when you're going to start thinking about how I'm going to deliver those results to the stakeholder. Again, make sure you understand, everyone understands what you're doing. Make sure you have the right people who are doing the work. And one thing, this last point here, don't overcomplicate your answer by using high-level analytics. This is so important. Sometimes just using a graph can be 10 times more impactful than a whole bunch of crazy numbers that you have on a slide that, as a result of some very complicated high-level analytic method that only you understand. So sometimes less is more. Okay, communicate the plan. Make sure everyone understands what's going on, everybody's documenting, and confront emotional issues. Now is the time to ask everybody on the team, do they understand what's going on? Do they have what they need? Are there any concerns? You don't want to wait until you're about, a week away from delivery and there's a problem. Okay, now, implementation. We're at the finish line. So now we have the results. You're going to want to scrutinize and evaluate the results. Here's the part where you got to put together the story. And then you have to be able to demonstrate conviction as you tell the story. And once you're all done, you can pop that bottle of champagne because, you've done it. So getting the results. At this point, this is where you do what we were talking about before, looking at the descriptive statistics, the predictive statistics, and then start using other models to kind of help discuss and determine how you change the behavior. All these steps are equally important in this process. Scrutinize and evaluate the results. At this point, you need to verify that what you're doing is actually correct. This is when maybe having 2 analysts as opposed to 1 comes in handy. If you can't afford or have only 1 analyst that's available, I think it will be really great to have a second opinion from another team to come in and review what you're doing as well. Also, you need to decide if the results you got actually make sense. You may have an idea of what the results will look like, and then once you actually do the project, you're like, whoa, that's not what I expected. Well, let's make sure the data is correct. Let's make sure the methodology you use is correct. And if that is so, and you still see a different result, then guess what? You were wrong. The results here have told you a different story. And that happens more often than you think.
Question on this, and this might be dependent on the situation of the project, but at some point when you start to review the analysis, and especially like you said, if something's really surprising, do you at some point involve the stakeholders, or maybe if it's a top executive, somebody on their team, or because sometimes what I've seen working with different methods is that if it's data that you're really familiar with the process, you might see something a little differently, or be able to troubleshoot something more effectively than an analyst that's just looking at the numbers that is not as familiar with the context. So do you pull people in or do some preliminary reviews with the numbers before the final, or what's your
Great point. A perfect example is, right now we were doing a project that looks at revenue data. And one of the things that we noticed, we had some questions with the data. We went to the person who was the head of the revenue data person, and he was able to answer all of our questions, so we were able to make better decisions based on that. So yeah, definitely go to the expert if you have any questions. Why do we have negative numbers here in the revenue part? It's because sometimes they make corrections, and they take information, put a negative value on one and then add a positive on the other because they had to make corrections. That was one of the big things that we saw in the data, for instance.
Yeah, another example where our client or our stakeholder perhaps wanted to see an outcome. So there's a bit of confirmation bias going on. Rather than waiting till the end to say there's no issue here, but I'm sure there's an issue. Well, there's not. Those check-ins all the way through to influence. I think, the check-in, as you put it, is we do that all the time. Right from the word get-go. I think you'll see it right through this presentation as well. When findings are not anomalous, maybe a little different to what they might be expecting, then we get onto it straight away. I think there's a few times where we've left it too late, and then you present, and it's like, oh my God, this is a really difficult meeting. And then you've got to redo the work for another 4 weeks. You don't want to be doing that.
One of the things, I think there are two things. One is that perspective, and somebody maybe doing something different and interpreting findings differently than maybe the team did. And then the other one is, of course, the more questions that come up. So one of the first questions you had, maybe this program didn't add value, and you start to show data, and 20 more questions come up. And it's nice for those to come up earlier, because then when you present later, you can have them. But
so, this is Brad. So what we do is, sorry, I'm right over the first marks, but one of the things. I
don't know if it's on. I'll try to talk loud.
You good, Brad? Thanks.
Okay. So one of the things that we do is we actually build into our process an expectation that we're going to iterate on the model. And so what we always do is we share preliminary results with our business and talk through them and say, do these make sense? Are they what we expect? And that's actually been really valuable because sometimes we found we didn't understand some of the data, like the revenue example that you were citing. But in some cases, there might be other data or things they looked at that we weren't aware of the first time that help us create a better model. And that iteration also makes them feel like they're part of the project. So that you can actually bring the customer along through your work. So the first time they see it isn't the very end.
Yeah, and look, just thanks, Brad. It's another sort of aspect of this. I just want to link. We use the revenue example. We're an engagement stream. All these things are really related. Al kind of spoke to this morning. For us, revenue is a key performance indicator, one of the most important ones for our people at senior level. So your remuneration, thank you, is absolutely pegged to it. Engagement is absolutely pegged to it as well. It's all related. So when we talk to the revenue folks, we're actually educating them equally on why it's important for the rest of the business. I think dialogue is just so critical. I use the phrase "pick up the phone" to everyone on the team. Pick up the phone. Just pick up the phone and talk to people. You'll learn as much as teach in the process.
How much time do I have? Okay. All right. So putting a story together. I cannot stress enough how important visualization is at this point. You need to focus on the results and not the methodology, and visuals go such a long way as opposed to a bunch of numbers. Because I'm an analyst, and I have an extensive background in numbers and doing presentations where I talk about the analytics itself. Sometimes I get caught up in my own self, like, look how smart I am. Look at my two-stage least squares regression, and it took me 6 months to do this, and look how complicated this model is. I'm so smart. No one cares. That's one of the things I learned very early. No one cares about how difficult your process was, what your analytic steps was. They were just like, what are the results, and how can I make that information work for me? Okay, so we're gonna have a little bit of fun here. So hands up, how many people quickly understand what this means? Blair, can you help out?
I'm with them.
Well, this is a result of a logistic regression. This here tells you what the marginal probabilities are of the regression. Look at me, I'm so smart. I did this all by myself.
Yeah, now look, just on that, I mean, I happen to know because we had a conversation about it. But, as a translator now, how do I take that and then take it to a senior leader and say, well, here's what you need to focus on? And that's really what this is all about.
So basically, we took the top 5 variables that was most associated or strongly associated with turnover, and then we just reported the impact of leaving the firm based on that same graph you saw previously.
And here's the thing, as a business leader, if we look at a number like 0.06 in the table, someone who doesn't get this or doesn't have an appreciation of what it means will discount that. Oh, it's not important. It's a small number. The reality is it's in the top 5 things, actionable things we can look at that will influence, in this case, retention, to drive the engagement sort of discussion following that. And what it also tells me is that, crikey, this one's got a negative and this is a positive. I think most people understand that. And look at that, team engagement score. And again, really simple. If I keep everything else the same and just look at engagement, it'll improve my retention by 1.45 percentage points. I can do something with that.
You have a question?
Observations I want to know, I mentioned in the story here. So
there's two variables on there that are impossible to change around a person. I shouldn't say impossible, unlikely to change about a person. So I can't change my gender and I can't change the color of my skin. So how do you deal, that's almost like a mitigating variable. Like you can't change that, but some of the others are actionable. So when you put this in front of a leader, I could take this and I could actually say, you know what, I'm going to change my hiring strategy because I'm going to hire people that are less likely to leave. Or, in other words, you could actually, through presenting these results, actually drive the bias maybe that you're trying to not have. So how do you actually talk through that story?
You know what I would do, for instance, with the minority indicator, this is where surveys become very useful, the exit survey. You get to understand why minorities are leaving, and they may have a different reason for leaving as opposed to non-whites or non-minority people. So, you can't change the minority, you can't change their skin color, but you can have a better understanding of what may be driving minorities to leave at a greater rate than non-minority.
And our approach is always, actually, it's a good question because this always comes up. I think, with people data, it's not cut and dry. I mean, some people say financial data is cut and dry. I think those in finance would disagree with that, and I'll probably agree with them. It's not so cut and dry. But the point is that, it's not big data. We have 300,000 people, but it's not big data. And it's also very noisy data. Minority status, or BME in the UK, South Africa, are the only 3 countries we're legally required to collect it. We can't collect it elsewhere. So, there are a lot of limitations. So there are always those kind of variables you can control and others that, we need to look at this again. So we do a 2-phase approach. Usually we'd we'd present, this is just one slide, obviously. There's a narrative around it that we would structure, and then what we would recommend, last page, next steps. We recommend 1, 2, 3. One of those things may be for those parts of the business where minority, as an example, is a potential issue. That's the next study. It's the phase 2 study, and go and focus on that alone. So it's what did Al say this morning? It's about it's not about 100% certainty. It's about making decisions and enough information to make it. This and the gender question is a call to go and look further. And I think that is a good result from that study.
It's not about changing somebody, it's about where should we focus our strategy and our intervention, right? So this is what you use this for, it's not...
Sorry. So I said it's not about changing somebody, it's about where to focus interventions. So it's about understanding what is going on and then to focus, strategic workforce planning, for example, or look out for the males in a different way. It's not about telling us to change our workforce or recruit different.
No. Look, you can't break the law as a result, because that's essentially what you would be doing potentially on the gender question. But no, you're right. You might put a program around. Well, okay, are we working our people too hard? It might be overtime. For us, it's billable hours. So, what does that mean? We can do some more predictive analysis. Say, if we just focus on that program, will that improve the overall engagement level or retention level? We don't have to do everything. As a matter of fact, you can't do everything. That's partially your question as well, isn't it? I guess the other point is that when we look at this, we've got our footprints on 150 countries, like a few of the organisations here. It's just so segmented and matrixed. When we look at culture, we do our global survey like everyone else. And we have an overall score, and we want to be best in class. That's really useful from a change agent, maybe at the most senior level of the business, but pretty useless, if you will, at a local level. You need to, because locally things are so different. So this graph, the example here might be our overall, say, for one market, the UK. But then when we look at London versus, regions versus Scotland, different parts of our business, our advisory versus our audit practices, that will be different. And that's where we get the actions coming, out. So minority may not be the same everywhere. I think that's another.
Do we have another question? I think I saw another hand go up. Okay, not? Go on. Okay, demonstrate conviction. Do not waver. There are going to be some naysayers. You're going to have this presentation, you have the numbers, and they're just like, well, I just don't believe it, because in my experience, I saw this. Well, at this point, you have to hold your ground. You've done a very thorough research. You probably looked at the question from several angles, not just one, and you have to be very clear in explaining that as well. And also, make sure that when you're answering the questions and giving this presentation, you also have to make sure that you're talking in the language that they understand as well. The last thing you want to do is somehow, in the process of having this conversation, they lose sight or, somehow communication breaks down. So you got to be very clear when you're giving this results of this your question. And finally, you've done the work, you gave the presentation, the stakeholder loves what you've done. Yay, we have finally did it, we've succeeded. And once you've done that, I promise you it's going to be short-lived. Because at this point, you're going to have the data, you've got the people, and you've just demonstrated to everyone that you have the capacity to answer even more questions like this. So be prepared, more questions are going to be coming. And so my final thought today is that right now we're at a time where we have lots of data. We now have really smart people who understand, high-level analytics, where at one time it used to just be like astrophysics or biostatistics. Now they're taking these same methodologies and applying it to people analytics. And we're doing some great things. You see some great results. And I'm just really excited about this time because right now, the opportunities are limitless as to what you can do with this information. Okay, thank you. you.
All right, so that kind of concludes the intro, I think, to the engagement piece. Probably hand back to Sanya, but just one plug in terms of some of the more technical, as I mentioned before. Tomeka is going to talk about some of the tools and the techniques in a bit more detail at one of the workshops this afternoon. So it's a little bit of a flow on from what we've seen here. So if you attend that, you'll certainly recognise and link the two together. So thank you.